Welcome, everyone. Hey, welcome to the live chat. This is the Friday night live chat. It's been a minute, and here we are back again. It always feels like it's coming on so quickly every week. This week flew by, and it was crazy. There was so much going on other than just YouTube videos. For everyone who's just new to the channel, hi, my name's Clyde. This is the live stream. I usually do a live stream every Friday evening at 6:30 Pacific time. That would be 9:30 Eastern for everybody out there on the eastern side of Canada. Welcome. I do shows every morning. News, talk about the news, talk about what's happening in Canada, talk about things that are happening in Parliament at the time, perhaps around the world. Who knows? Things that are just very important, I think, in my estimate. So I share them via videos on the internet, largely on YouTube, and also have a presence over on Twitter, or X as it's known now. I've been doing spaces with Alex all this week. That's been quite a fun experience. If you guys know who Alex is, he's going to be joining the show later this evening. This is going to be great. This is Alex Zoltan. He's a fantastic independent reporter. He's stopped doing his quit his full-time job to do this. He was like, hey, I've got some money in the bank. I'm going to take this time at a time where Canada is in some precarious a precarious moment moving forward into the future of the long history of our country. He's taken this time to do some investigative journalism, and I think that's a very noble cause of his. And I'm very proud of all the work that he's been doing and been making national headlines, believe it or not. It's crazy. So we've been doing some spaces. If you're not familiar with Twitter, Twitter has spaces. These are audio only hangouts where you can bring people in and chat, and it's a live interactive sort of thing. It's great. So yeah, get on over to Twitter. Give Alex a follow. Give myself a follow. It's Clyde Do Something without the G. Not enough space for all the characters. Follow there, and of course later as well in the stream, we're going to have another guest, and that'll be Jim McMurtry. He's going to come in. We're going to be talking about the three of us are going to be talking about, well, new rules surrounding what you're allowed to say in Canada. They're calling it the title of the video, of course. Will it be legal? Will it be a crime to challenge the narrative, the contemporary narrative? That's really the question moving forward. Is free speech dead in Canada, or is it dying, or is it being executed and it's living strong? They're waterboarding it, I guess. What would you even say to this? It's incredible. Then there's a motion being passed, or a bill that's being put forward to add to the criminal code, questioning the narrative around residential schools in Canada. Anything to do with the narrative, you question it, against the law, jail for you, directly to jail. No matter if what you're saying is true or not, or fiction, whatever. Yeah, if you question the narrative, they want to throw you in jail. And this is what we're going to get into today on the stream. But in the meantime, chat, come on over, chat. Hey, welcome everybody to the show. This is great. I've got the live chat going. I know I've been criticized before. You've got the top chat. No, this is the live chat happening right now. Great to hear from everybody. If you just got a moment of time, just throw in the chat where it is that you're viewing the show from. And I got to double check something, because I always forget something to check while I'm setting everything up at the very beginning. Let me just check something, because Windows has been having a lot of fun with my audio lately and just turning the stuff down. I don't know why it does that. I just want to make sure that everything is good on this end. And yeah, the levels were turned down, but let's turn them back up. That should be better. Okay, boom. There we go. We're good. Yeah. All right. So we got some Central Sask, Pembroke, Ontario, Lambton, Ontario. Canada needs a total revamp. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with that sentiment. You're gonna probably hear a lot of that sentiment tonight as well on the show. Sorry, I don't follow unlawful laws. Yeah, well, it would be an unconstitutional law, but so are other some of the other laws that they have in Canada. And the problem is we don't have a Supreme Court that's willing to take on these challenges. It's really sad, and we don't have a lot of what you need is people suing the government and challenging these things, or else forever hold your peace, as they say, because that'll be it. They'll just charge people, it'll become precedent, and then boom, that's it. There you go. Totally good. Until it's all challenged. Absolutely. These liberals are cooked. Hopefully conservatives can course correct on this. Well, this one being said, I mean, I don't know if it'll even if we have an early election, anything on the table will be gone. It'll be gone, starting fresh with a new government after this. So not sure. Oliver, BC. I've still yet to be there. Still yet to go there. I've been hearing it's beautiful. I really hear it's a beautiful place. Trudeau will again be PM, and when he calls an election, he Jugmeat and the Bloc on his side. Do you really think that's going to be the case? Do you think they'll win in an election? Yeah, I'm going to call X to doubt on that one for sure. Huge X to doubt on them ever winning an election again, or at least winning the next election. I'm not your buddy guy with a $10 super chat says, unless Canada changes course, yes, it will become illegal. It will be the first considered. It'll first be considered an act of mis or disinformation. Unfortunately, like the tide of an ocean, this will always come and go away. Will it come and go away? I mean, we have some other free speech laws that have been around for a while that have not been so good. Solar, welcome to the channel. Solar, jumping in with a membership. Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. But yeah, we'll see. And this will be the main discussion tonight. So I think we can get into some of the other things that I wanted to bring up before we get into that discussion, because that's going to be very intensive. We're going to get into that quite a bit. Before we do, I wanted to talk about stuff that's happening here in British Columbia on the political front. Let's pop this up. This is news. I believe today that this popped up. Let's get this going. John Rustad calls for abolishing taxes on tips, supporting hardworking British Columbians in the hospitality industry. This is an interesting development. This is well, I mean, it's a step in the right direction. If anything, it'll get a lot of people who typically would vote NDP, people in the service sector, maybe young people, looking over and saying, you know what? Cost of living's pretty bad. I don't know. I might have gone with the lefties, but hey, if this personally affects me immediately, that would be a fantastic thing. So the announcement says here for immediate release, John Rustad calls for abolishing taxes on tips, supporting hardworking British Columbians in the hospitality industry. The NDP's tax policies are hurting the very people who keep our hospitality industry running. It's time to let workers keep what they earn and stop taxing their tips. John Rustad, leader of the Conservative Party of British Columbia. Incidentally, this is something that Donald Trump had said. And then what was it? Kamala Harris popped in with that. That's American news. Nonetheless, nobody in Canada is talking about doing this one. So this is pretty exciting. It should be on a federal level. I'd wish that we could see that on a federal level as well. Perhaps they could not tax super chats, because those are technically tips. That would be something else. Absolutely. Wanda Hall also joining and becoming a member of the YouTube channel. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's awesome. And I'm not your buddy guy with another $10 super chat says, when I'm talking tides of an ocean, I'm talking about generations. Regimes will always rise and always fall. Same with civilization. Same with liberty. China was not always communist. You're correct. You're correct on that. Absolutely. And I'd love to see liberty rise in China. And I could see that happening, especially in an environment with the housing bust they're currently going through. And then they can stop influencing us to try to get us to become communist. That would be fantastic. Buying all our politicians. And, well, in Canada, it's an intergenerational thing. It's the Trudeau legacy is that of bringing Chinese communism to the country, but I digress. On October 4th, Vancouver, BC, John Rustad, leader of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, announced today that his government, if elected, will abolish taxes on tips, earnings earned by workers in the hospitality industry, including restaurants, bars, cafes, saloons, restaurant. Hey, YouTube, come on, John. What are you doing? YouTube as well. Because we have to pay taxes on these things. It's all declared. That's the thing. And because it's all digital, there's no cheating it. You're definitely part of that. Rustad emphasized that the service workers are being unfairly taxed on their tips they earn while being left behind by David Eby's NDP government. Tips are a lifeline for so many workers in BC hospitality industry, especially as the cost of living continues to rise, Rustad said. It's unjust that the government is taxing the hard-earned tips of servers, bartenders, and other service industry professionals who are already struggling to get by. Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of people who are struggling. It's crazy. Ending the unfair tax burden under current laws, tips are subject to taxation, placing an additional burden on workers who rely heavily on them to make ends meet. Rustad criticized the NDP government for continuing to tax service industry workers on what are often unpredictable variable incomes. Government shouldn't be taking a cut of the tips that service workers rely on to pay rent, buy groceries, and support their families, John Rustad said. This is an unfair tax. We're going to put an end to it. Some people would say that all taxation is theft. All taxes is unfair when it's going to pay off interest on debt that was accrued by reckless politicians that put that forward. Actually, I want to actually show this video because this is pertinent actually to this situation. I saved this because this is my dude. This is my dude over at the Taxpayers Federation. Let me get this on the correct screen if I'm going to make this work. Whoa, congratulations. Okay, if I want to get the audio to work, I'm going to have to actually pop it onto a different screen here. So just bear with me for a moment while I make all this happen. We'll get this going. Just a moment here. Present my screen and get that on there. So let's share this. Let's share this. All right, this is Franco Terrazzano saying, you're giving a congratulations on the doubling of the national debt. That's right. Doubled this week. This is crazy. Mr. Rosso Pico, member for 23 months. Man, that's been some time. I think I just saw a flaming pine cone jumping from the patio tree. Oh, we're going to get into that. That's funny. If I can get through some of this other stuff first, I want to get into that because that's hilarious. Thank you for the for the chat there. Oh, amazing.
It's official. Woo! It's official. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has officially doubled the federal debt.
Wow.
It took nearly 24 prime ministers and 150 years for the federal government to rack up $600 billion of debt, which is where the total stood right before Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's first day as prime minister. In less than a decade, Trudeau then jacked that number up all the way to $1.2 trillion of debt. Trudeau has doubled the debt in less than a decade. So what does that mean for you? Well, Trudeau's debt binge is having a material impact on your life and also on the lives of your kids and grandkids. A baby born today is already on the hook for about $30,000 in federal government debt. And that debt must be paid back with interest and higher
With
taxes.
interest. That's
Which
it.
means higher taxes for future generations of Canadians. And the way things are going, the future looks bleak. The Parliamentary Budget Officer released a recent report that projects the next balanced budget in Ottawa in 2040. That's 16 years from now. And that would mean another $300 billion added to the federal debt. And that means more of your money wasted on interest charges. Interest charges on the federal debt are already costing taxpayers like you more than $1 billion every single week. The feds now waste more money servicing the debt than what they're sending to the provinces in health transfers. In fact, every penny collected through the GST is now going to pay interest on the debt. So welcome to Canada, folks, where you pay a federal sales tax to cover the interest charges on the Trudeau government credit card. And big deficits make it more likely that the government will shake down taxpayers like you for more money. Take Trudeau's recent capital gains tax hike as an example. The tax hike was sold to Canadians in part as a way to keep the debt from spiraling further. But it really illustrates how this government does not have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. The capital gains tax hike is expected to take $6.9 billion from taxpayers this year. But with the government spending $535 billion, Trudeau will burn through that extra cash in 5 days.
Oh, not to mention the Laffer curve kicks in really fast on this one. So for people who don't understand the Laffer curve, don't know what that is. So the Laffer curve is the idea that people will pay their taxes and begrudgingly pay their taxes up until a point, and then they just don't at all. They just give up. They give up, and they do it in several ways. Either they start working under the table, they start doing, black market stuff, going into that. I don't want to give anyone any ideas. Or they'll take their investments, which is the capital gains, and they'll kick them out of the country and not realize them back in to the country. So if the capital gains that they earn on something that's outside of the country, they just never repatriate that money. They never bring it back. So it's a net loss of revenue. That's the idea of the Laffer curve. You get taxation to go up, up, up. Revenue goes up to a point, and then it goes whap. It drops precipitously and crazy. A lot of dropping going on there. So this is the reality of the situation. They're pulling in bigger taxes, but it doesn't mean that they're going to have more revenue out of it. Classic mistake.
In technical terms, this is what's known as a financial dumpster fire. And Trudeau cannot blame it on the pandemic. Trudeau first promised to balance the budget in 2019. Remember that? Well, he broke that promise to you and instead ran a $20 billion deficit. And that was before the pandemic. In fact, in 2018, Trudeau was spending all-time highs even after accounting for inflation and population growth. That means Trudeau was spending more money in 2018 than the government did during any single year of the world wars or past recessions. Trudeau then used the cloud of a pandemic to go on a debt-fueled spending spree. During the pandemic, the federal government announced $576 billion in new spending, but $205 billion of that had nothing to do with COVID. Fast forward to today, to 2024, and spending is still ballooning. Last year, the government pinky promised to find $15 billion in savings over a handful of years. Well, how's that effort going? Well, the feds increased spending by $24 billion last year. It plans to increase spending by another $111 billion over the next 5 years. So yeah, taxpayers have every reason to be pessimistic. Trudeau doubled the debt in less than a decade. Debt interest charges now blow a $1 billion hole in the budget every single week. The government is on track to run deficits for the next decade and a half, and this government has shown time and time again that it couldn't give a damn about fiscal responsibility. But there is a silver lining. Things aren't too far gone Yet, the federal government could reverse the capital gains tax hike and still balance the budget next year. All it would need to do is stick to its own spending plan from just 2 budgets ago. And the last time I checked, nobody was screaming about austerity when Trudeau tabled his 2022 budget. After a decade of runaway government borrowing, promising to limit spending growth is just not enough, not nearly enough. What is needed is for the government to pick up some scissors and to actually cut spending.
That's the reality of the situation. Now, go over to share this tab instead. Get over to better dwelling, and we're seeing bleak sceneries here when it comes to the economic projections. Canada just saw 1 in 20 businesses close in a month, biggest wave since the pandemic. I mean, the headlines are just crazy. Canadian consumer insolvencies just saw the second biggest month ever. Any other great news? Ontario, biggest city, saw investors buy up 85% of condos fueled by government incentives. Wow. Remember when Trudeau said he didn't want big business buying all the stuff, and that's why he's going to have the government lease out places from government properties? Yeah, well, their government incentives just saw 85% of the condos get gobbled up by big business. That's exactly right. So do you think they're going to hit the market for rentals in a reasonable price frame? Nah, I doubt that. I seriously doubt that. But hey, let's get back over to this camera. I like this. Get the chat back in here. We wanted to talk a little bit more about British Columbia politics. Somehow, I always get railroaded, get off track of what I was originally talking about. So, tax on tips. That's coming up. Tax on tips. If the British Columbia Conservatives get voted in, here's Cat Canada talking about this.
Hey, beautiful British Columbia. Did you know that a vote for John Rustad is a vote to bring back plastic straws and wait for it?
Yeah, plastic straws,
tax
right?
On tips. So the next time you go out to a restaurant, leave them a really nice tip and write on the receipt that if they vote for John Rustad, that really large tip won't be taxed. Let's do this.
That's actually a great idea. Go give a tip and write on the receipt for your server. Hey, guess what? Next time, if you vote for the Conservatives, they're gonna get rid of taxes on these tips. You'll get to keep the whole thing. I'm voting for plastic straws, says Adam. Absolutely. I don't understand how plastic straws are still banned, because the Supreme Court ruled that ban was unconstitutional. So I know they're challenging it, and they want to challenge it and do it again. But yeah, John Rustad's going to bring back our straws because it's just insane. And it turns out, the glue that they use to put paper straws together turns out to be toxic. Why would you want that? That's the worst. Charlie with 279 super chat. Keep up the good work. Thank you. We decide you believe. I like the avatar there. Thank you so much, Charlie. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I will keep it up. I'm going to keep it up. Keep it going tonight as well. Other things in the news here. I wanted to share this as well. Breaking. Drea Humphrey breaking this story. She's from the Rebel News, by the way. Breaking today, I caught these thugs working together to destroy Tri-City Conservative Party BC MLA candidates named Hamed Najafi and Stefan Frolux campaign signs. They left Green and NDP signs standing. DM me if you know who these people are, and please retweet. So this is, instead of me retweeting, here I am sharing this out to everybody on the stream. If you know who these people are, get in touch with Dre Humphreys. She's going to do an expose on these individuals. I don't know if they realize that's actually I think it's not just vandalism. I think it's a greater offense than that in that one. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. But here's more about what's going on in British Columbia, because you'll never see an election without some lefty doing some funny business in all of this. This is Brittany. Go give her a follow over on X, but she's been reporting on this election.
Hello, Brittany here. Just popping on to chat about the embarrassing and desperate act of the BC NDP this morning, trying to get the BC Conservative Party to have to change their name on the ballot from Conservative Party to BC Conservative Party, because they said they're trying to make people think that they're affiliated with the federal party. And the thing is that it's not the BC Conservatives' responsibility to have to educate people to know the difference between federal and provincial
This is
politics.
actually kind
And
of funny.
I run into this all the time. I talk to people. They say, "Oh yeah, I love Pierre. I'm voting. For the Conservative Party in this election." And I'm like, "Well, there are like a lot of similar values obviously happening, but it's not the same. So you should definitely look at the platform and educate yourself and see what the BC Conservatives are about, because it's specific to BC obviously, and much different than the Conservative Party of Canada." So do you notice that other people that are not educated on the difference between the two? Let me know.
Yeah, I mean, the difference, if you're voting in the provincial election, I hope you know that you're voting for the provincial British Columbia, or the provincial Conservatives. Nonetheless, this it seems like a little skeevy ploy by David Eby to make it a thing where essentially, yeah, it's let's switch over here to this, to say that they have to switch their name on the ballot last minute, and it is quite last minute. It's there's lots of last minute things that they've been doing, but this one would be, yeah, that would really make things difficult for them as they're trying to campaign, get ready for uh, another debate coming up. We're going to televise this debate as it comes out. I think it's on October 8th. So we'll do another live stream of that, and that's going to be something else. But yeah, get over and register, because yeah, it's coming up. I think it's on the 18th of, well, let's have a look here. Let's have a look. The election is coming up. We have here 2024 provincial elections BC. Register to vote. Get over there. Register. Don't delay. If you're not registered, you won't be able to vote. So sign up. It takes 2 minutes. You just put your stuff in. A lot of times it'll just autofill because you've used things like Amazon or whatever. It'll autofill. Just get your name in there so that you can vote in the next election. But yes, the election, I believe it's on the 18th of this month. So it's coming up real soon. Don't hesitate. Get out there, get it done, because that's the thing. Now, other things that were coming up in this last this election cycle. So BC NDP leader David Eby has written to Conservative leader John Rustad an open letter urging him to drop candidates he says have dangerous and extreme views. What were these dangerous and extreme views? Well, it turned out it was during the debate he dropped his October surprise, which surprise was kind of a wet noodle. It didn't go over all that well, but this was our coverage of it on the show. This is what he did.
Poach each other's healthcare workers. That's the situation across the country right now. People deserve high quality care no matter where they are in the province. And so training up those extra healthcare professionals, we're training 1,900 nurses, we're recruiting internationally doctors and nurses, we're getting them on track. We have a commitment around immediate provisional licenses for doctors across Canada. But here's the part that I don't understand. How do we recruit more doctors and nurses to this healthcare system? And John, I'm going to ask you this question. You have a candidate on the North Coast. His name is Chris Sankey. He's tweeting out that COVID vaccines cause AIDS. So do you agree with your candidates? Like, do you find that acceptable that your candidate would do that? How would you recruit? And I know, I just want to make sure that you know that this is a real thing. I'm going to pass you a copy of the tweet right there. And how do we recruit the doctors and nurses that we need If you've got candidates out there that want to sit around the cabinet table, that want to represent their communities, they say
Okay,
that
thank
COVID
you.
vaccines cause AIDS.
Thank you. Open.
Okay, so this was the claim that vaccines cause AIDS. I had to look into it. I was, what are you even on about? Is this real? Of course, this was brought up in an article that was talking about the debate. Sankey's campaign manager Andrew Painter sent a written statement from Sankey, said about the BC NDP is trying to cancel me, but he did not address the question about whether he believes vaccines cause AIDS, which in the screen grab that the NDP used, and I think I have it here somewhere, is a screen grab. He doesn't actually say AIDS. He says VAIDS, which I guess is some new acronym for some people, saying vaccine acquired. There it is. I got it here. So this was it. Moments ago, David Eby challenged John Rustad on his candidate, Chris Sankey's belief that vaccine causes AIDS. And even in the tweet, it says AIDS in the tweet, but in the actual tweet where he says anything, he's actually retweeting something from Jim Ferguson, which is a huge Twitter account, massive followers. And he talks about how the Canadian government admit 74% of triple vaccinated now have VAIDS. He's not saying AIDS. He's saying VAIDS, a different thing, apparently. Apparently has a different connotation to it. Somebody asked, what is VAIDS? And this is in the screen grab from David Eby, which it says vaccine-acquired immune deficiency syndrome. This is something that people are talking about. Anyway, this is a thing. BC election is on October 19th. Sorry, I got it wrong. The 18th, I said. No, it's on the 19th. Advanced voting is 10th through 13th, 15, 16. Okay, thank you very much, Angela. I really appreciate that. Jumping in there with the super chat to let everybody know that. So that's the date. Get out there, make sure you vote. And you got no excuse. You can't say, oh, I was working. It's legality. It's something in I don't know what charters it's in, but it's the law. Your work is obligated to give you time to go and vote. That's not an excuse. Get out there, vote, register, and then vote. You don't have to vote the way I'm telling you to vote. I'm just telling you to vote. Voting is one of those things where you really have a hard time convincing people your opinions when you didn't even go out and throw your ballot in afterwards if you want to complain about who's in government at the time. So go on, get your vote in there. And that's a great civic duty. It's the first place to start anywhere. Anyway, if that's what your aim is, which of course it is mine. Anyway, I want to shift topics now. I want to talk about what's been in the news lately. And what's been in the news lately is this. Well, we've seen a shift from pushing people towards censoring themselves. And if they can't censor themselves through let's just say coercion or using social cues to get people to censor themselves, well, then the government will then step forward and say, you know what, we're going to step in and we're going to censor yourself for you. We're going to censor you, and we're going to tell you what you can and cannot say. This, of course, has come up in recent times surrounding the residential school happenings that have happened in Canada. We just had the holiday, the new civic holiday, Truth and Reconciliation Day. And how not to celebrate this, but to bring in a new ministry, the Ministry of Truth and Reconciliation, of course, with the caveats of you not being allowed to say what it is that you want to say. And to bring more light to this conversation, I thought I'd bring in some noteworthy guests that very strong opinions on this in particular, and maybe some nuance that you haven't heard of. So bear with us tonight as we have this conversation that could get a little bit on the sensitive side for some individuals. I understand that, and so we'll tread lightly, but at the same time, understand that we're seeking truth, as well as trying to preserve liberty. This really is an important thing. So I'd like to introduce my first guest this evening, and well, you've seen him on the show before, and he's a very passionate man. So passionate that he was fired from his profession because of his passion for the truth and just for decency and knowing what happened in our nation's history. Welcome to the show, Jim McMurtry. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome.
And it's been a while since we've talked, and there's been a bunch of updates to the story, I suppose you could say. We're going to get into all of this because right now they're making a push actually to make what it is that you've been saying and what it is that you've been bringing to light part of the criminal code and actually illegal to say. I'm sure you're aware of this, correct?
Absolutely. I have a lot to say about that, but I'll wait for your specific questions.
Okay, fair enough. We'll get into this then. So this is going to be a panel discussion. Also with me today has been on the show quite a bit lately because he's been breaking all kinds of news across the country. One thing that he broke recently was the fact that the NDP are broke. He broke the story that they're broke. This is amazing. Welcome, the amazing Alex Zoltan.
Thanks for having me, Clyde. Hi, Mr. McMurtry.
Nice to meet you, Alex.
Great. So I want to start this off with a post from Jagmeet because why not? Because Jagmeet Singh is at the forefront of all of these stories these days. So let's get on this. This is what he had to say. The residential school system was a genocide, and its effects are still felt to this day by survivors, Indigenous families, and communities. To deny the hate-filled devastation of the residential school system is harmful and cruel. Hence the word deny. Thank you, Leah Gazin, for your work on this important bill. Now, this bill, which is being introduced, is a bill to make speaking about this illegal. Today, I tabled Bill C-413 to help combat residential school denialism. In honor of Orange Shirt Day, I extend this gift to survivors and their families on behalf of myself and all my colleagues. May you find justice and healing in the protection of your stories. Protecting stories. Let's hear what she had to say here.
Ms. Gazan, seconded by Ms. Zidlaut, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Code, Promotion of Hatred Against Indigenous Peoples. This motion is deemed adopted. The Honourable Member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to table an act to amend the Criminal Code, Promotion of Hatred against Indigenous Peoples. If passed, this bill would add to the Criminal Code the offense of willfully promoting hatred against Indigenous peoples by condoning, denying, justifying, or downplaying the harm caused by the residential school system in Canada, calling irrefutable historical facts into question. A genocidal project that was recognized as such unanimously in the House. Survivors and their families deserve to heal from this intergenerational tragedy and be free from violent hate, and we cannot allow their safety and well-being to be put further at risk. All parliamentarians must stand firm against all forms of damaging hate speech, including the denial of the tragedy of the residential schools in Canada. And at a time of increasing residential school denialism, including from some parliamentarians, survivors, their families, and communities need protection and a platform to share our history. In honor of Orange Shirt Day, I extend this gift to you on behalf of me and all of my colleagues. May you find justice and healing in the protection of your stories. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gazan, seconded by Ms. Idlout, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
Ms.
So that is the bill that was presented in Parliament. Now, Jim, you've been outspoken about the story of the residential school massacre, as it's been. I believe it's been dubbed a massacre, as a genocide, mass graves. But it's a murky story. It's a very murky story because it all started based on ground penetrating radar, and then a lot of people don't know much about it, but they were told this is what happened, and people just go along with what they've been told. How is that any different from how is the truth any different from what we've been told?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Kai. It's wonderful seeing you again. And I find this is almost as though we're living in a Alice in Wonderland type world, that we're down a rabbit hole, because the residential school project was not a devastation, as Jagmeet Singh presented. I think it was absolutely essential. Education is a right. So the first question, rhetorical, that I would want to pose is, okay, so if you don't put kids in school, such as residential schools, where there were nomadic bands or isolated communities where it was unfeasible to have a school right within the community, if you don't have those schools, what education do the kids get? And the answer is nothing. So I think we're doing a lot better today with the schools that we provide all Canadians. But anyhow, there's just so much that's just completely, flatly ridiculous, such as they were compulsory when that wasn't the case. Education for Indigenous kids wasn't even compulsory until 49 years after it was for all other Canadians. Indigenous people still send their kids to Western modern schools. Again, education is a right and necessity. And so this idea of labeling or creating a false equivalency with the Holocaust is, to me, very difficult to accept. Just say a couple more things very quickly. I put out a tweet the other day wearing an orange shirt that said, where are the bodies? And I got 1.3 million views. And I was proud of myself. And I said, oh, okay, I think Canadians are waking up to their, where is the evidence for all these claims? And then the next morning, I started getting a lot of threats, including death threats. So what Leah Gazan is saying is they need protection. But all she's saying really is she needs protection against the truth. Well, who's out to get Indigenous people over this? People who just like not to be labeled murderers or genocidal, psychopathic killers like the nuns and the Sisters of St. Anne's and the Oblate fathers and priests and brothers at the Kamloops Residential School. I think it's really awful to label them as having murdered 215 children and secretly buried them at night, using 6-year-olds to help them. Some of the dead were apparently as young as 3. These are all things that were in the media. And none of it's true. No bodies, no missing children, not a single name of a missing child, not a single parent ever complained about a child missing. No police investigation. The police aren't investigating the claim in Kamloops. So I lost my job over something that is nothing other than a hoax. And so if I seem passionate, as you described me at the outset, and I appreciate that because I am passionate, but I'm also someone who is soberly knowledgeable of the area. So I have a doctorate from the University of Toronto, of many publications. I'm the son of a Chief Justice who won the Order of Canada and among many other distinctions. So I'm not somebody who's coming to this without a foundation of knowledge. The schools were not houses of horrors. The teachers did their best. They were freely offered. The kids were given food and shelter and clothing and so much.
And you don't seem like someone who's coming at this from a point of prejudice, some animus towards Native people, as people might lay charges of that. You seem to legitimately be looking towards the truth. Now, this is something that's I'm very passionate about free speech, and when these kinds of things come up, what is the truth, what is the real story is something we'd all like to get to the bottom of, but we won't get to the bottom of it if it's legislated a crime to even ask the questions of this. And this is my real concern here today. And the idea is to let the audience decide for themselves. I'm not here to convince anyone either way. I care about the ability to be able to have these conversations in the first place.
Yeah, there's two things that are really important for your audience to know. One of them is that in 2 years ago, all parliamentarians, including Conservative members of Parliament, voted to support a motion that called residential schools genocide. Around the same time, a little bit before, the government passed legislation the legislation that Leah Gazin, the NDP MP from Manitoba, that she's proposing is identical to legislation that's already in place. One cannot, in Canada, question, downplay the Holocaust. And I understand that. And I understand that because I think the international consensus for some time was that there were millions of Jewish people, including many others as well, killed during the Holocaust, during the Second World War. But still, I don't believe in legislation like that because it's just absurd. She said in the little clip that you showed, and I'll shut up here because I'd love to hear from your other guest, Alex, but he has got wonderful things to say. But the irrefutable historical facts, I've never heard of a dumber statement in my life, because all history, it's hard to know anything that happens, even today. But with time, we have a better understanding because we're able to collect more information. We're able to see things like carbon dating, things like in Kamloops, actual excavation one day, where people dig into the ground and say, look, these GPR results found a sewage trench from 1924. So this idea that things are irrefutable is illogical. Why would you want to protect people from inquiry into knowledge, into science, into history? Why would I care about Indian residential schools if it weren't for the fact that I was fired for telling something that was truthful, that those that died in attendance did so from fires, accidents, but mostly from disease such as tuberculosis. There was no murder. And in the Truth and Reconciliation report on page 128, the final report, it talks about these schools had good intentions and they had many accomplishments. So you can't even say that in a school or a university in all sorts of places, and yet it's in the Truth and Reconciliation report, which is authored by Indigenous people. So again, this Alice in Wonderland in the rabbit hole where or Orwellian, where war is peace and ignorance is truth, and so forth. So this is what's happening to us. So what I want to say here is, if they bring in another piece of legislation that stops people from downplaying or questioning, what people like Leah Gazin is saying about residential schools, I think it would be tragic for all sorts of reasons. Not only for the kids in school that want to learn the truth and so forth, but I think it'd be tragic also because you're allowing the most ignorant people in society to control information. If it were Einstein telling me, I'm going to make a law about the theory of relativity and no one's going to question it, I would say I can live with that because I'll never match his ability to understand how the universe functions. But when it's people who are so blatantly dishonest and in some cases ignorant of the real truth, the fact that these kids, and for the most part, were sent by their parents because they wanted the kids to have an education. They filled out application forms. So if Leah Gazin gets to seal the truth in a little package and says to people like Jim McMurtry, gets to go to jail, has to pay a huge fine for saying anything contrary to that, it's not only indicative of a dictatorial society like North Korea, but I think it's incredibly foolish. Everything I'm saying to you, I believe to be true. But if you say something 5 minutes from now, and it's better than what I've said, or you can prove to me I've said something wrong, then I'm going to change my opinion. Science is not by its very nature irrefutable. There is no truth in science that can't be tested and changed and destroyed. That's what makes science exciting. There is nothing that's fixed. And so everything that came out of her mouth in that clip of yours speaks of, is just, I would love to have a group of students to just examine that. I don't know how she got through grade school with that mindset. And unbelievably, you've got many members of parliament are supporting her, and you can see NDP members standing up, giving her an ovation. Irrefutable historical facts. I don't think it's possible to come up with any irrefutable historical fact. Even you're talking about the dates of the Second World War. No, we could decide that the dates were different based on things that we didn't previously know. So anyhow, thank you for giving me the opportunity to say this woman is unbelievable. And I will make it very clear to everybody right here. If any money in government ever comes after me because of Bill 413, watch out, because truth is going to surface and these people are going to look more foolish than they look now.
So you brought up Einstein, and incidentally, there was a publication, 100 scientists or physicists against the theory of relativity. Einstein was asked about this in an interview, and he said, "Well, it would have only taken just one to prove me wrong, right?" And that's great, because that's really all it should take, is one person with facts that go against what you're saying that can be tested. And that I think is that should be par for the course. Now, in Canada and other countries, they've made it illegal to question or deny the Holocaust, and that's become it's actually a legal thing. But in places like the United States, it is legal if you wanted to. It's protected under the First Amendment to do that. But there's no rash of people denying the Holocaust. I know there's the usual idiots, but there's no rash of actual people, and a fear that a lot of people are going to buy into this narrative or this story of the Holocaust having never happened. That's not a fear. So this kind of goes against the narrative of we need to police speech if we're to make sure to protect sensible or sensitive historical facts, unrefutable, apparently, as was stated in that speech. But Zoltan, you've been doing a little bit of looking into this. Alex.
Oh, very little. I'm certifiably unqualified to talk on this subject.
Fair enough.
I was looking into your educational background as well, Mr. McMurtry, and you've obviously spent years studying this. You did a master's thesis on Indian educational policy. I have spent a few hours this afternoon learning about the subject. So I will preface everything I have to say with, I completely agree with I agree with the concept of free speech. We have a consensus in the room on that. I'm a bit of a free speech absolutist myself. I think that the bill is silly, and I think as well that Leah Gazin is a particularly stupid person. All of that being said, I do have a little bit of skepticism about some of the things you've said, Mr. McMurtry. So again, I'm coming from a base knowledge of almost nothing. So almost think of this as me. I'm role playing as one of your shithead students that just asked a bunch of prodding questions. That's basically where I'm coming from. So when you say that there's no documented complaints, just because something's documented doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen. Can we agree on that?
Yeah.
So there certainly is enough testimony from enough different people and enough secondhand accounts and firsthand accounts and corroboration of accounts to assume that some terrible things did happen at these schools. Is that not fair?
I absolutely, and to what extent is debatable. But I would think in 143 schools over 141 years that certainly bad things happened.
Yeah. Okay.
But I could speak more to that, but I don't want to interrupt you, Alex. I love what you're doing. I don't think it makes any sense for me to speak about this. Many people already know my story. They know people like the viewpoint of people like me. But it's great to have it tested. With the Truth and Reconciliation report, they didn't speak about any kids in graves and Kamloops. They didn't speak about any kids being murdered. They didn't speak about any teachers being murderers. So one day in school, I was teaching grade 12 calculus. And I was, so I'm looking at Alex here as a student of mine. You're younger than I am. You better look, and you're all sorts of things. But just let me just say this to you, Alex, that so I was supposed to talk about residential schools because news of Kamloops had just come out, and everybody's wearing orange at the school, and including face paint, some things that others might consider inappropriate. But anyhow, so it was this terrible sense of anguish, of moral panic, of kids crying, and some being really angry. And when I said something that went against the narrative, which is my understanding, those that are intended to study disease, I could just see blood in their eyes. And I tried to talk them down from it and give a little bit of historical perspective. But I was unsuccessful, and I haven't taught since, which was 3.5 years ago. My employer never asked me, to this day, has never asked me what you're doing. You're listening to me. My employer has never done that. They have the power, and my union didn't want anything to do with me. My regulatory body wanted to cancel my teaching certificate for life. I fought all sorts of people. I've been by myself, really. I've met a lot of wonderful people on Twitter and sort of supportive, but I'm fighting this by myself. And the union is sticking with me only because it knows the moment it doesn't, then it's going to be subject to a lawsuit by me for unfaithful representation. So I'm tough. I'm tough in this way, that I'm old enough to fight people. I have nothing to lose. They took away my job. They can't hurt me financially. They don't know more than I do, as again, I have a PhD from the University of Toronto in educational history. So I feel bring it on, bring it on. Now, I would say in any school, bad things happen. I was at a school where one of my favorite students and the best athlete at the school died at the school playing basketball. And I've had a number of my own students die. I've been at funerals at some of those students because I was so close to them. The families invited me. Most of those kids, none of those kids were white. So if anyone wants to label me as a racist for being against the residential, idea of being genocide, then, I just have most of my teaching is being with kids who are purposely different from me because I learned from them, and it's more exciting for me to cross and be in a school that kind of represents the United Nations. And a lot of schools, in big cities in Canada do, and that's fun. So they tried. My employer tried all these things. I'm a racist. I'm a pervert. I'm all these things. They tried to get me after, and I'm going, oh, well, we'll just provide some evidence, please. And so what we're really talking about here more than anything else is Kamloops, because if Kamloops didn't happen, they wouldn't have UNDRIP. They wouldn't be bringing in 94 things, including recently the Premier of British Columbia saying that we should give all Crown land over to the 4 or 5% of the population that is, I don't say Indigenous, because almost nobody is fully Indigenous. We're all a mixture of all sorts. I'm part Neanderthal. I'm part Viking. I'm part French. I'm mostly British. You go back a little further, my son is 0.1% West African. And so we're all a mixture. So the idea that a small part of the population should be able to control the land in British Columbia based on race or a blood quantum. They have a little bit more. Of course, we have. My son also in his DNA test was part Yakut, which is indigenous in Siberia. So this idea that we should divide people on the basis of what percentage we are of this particular makeup is to me really dangerous. But just coming back to my thing about Kamloops. So Kamloops really had an effect on society. And this legislation wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Kamloops. So what she's doing is she's going after people like me and others like her. And because I'm saying, well, there aren't any bodies. I said that the moment I was the first person, because I went right away and I said, this didn't happen. and lost my job, and I stood by what I was saying. Nobody came to my rescue. Nobody picked up the phone and said, "Hey, Jim, I agree with you." I was contacted by Rebel News, but almost a year and a half later. So I fought alone for a long time. And but I just knew that this didn't happen. I knew that teachers don't murder students. I knew that religious people are, particularly those that give their life mission over to this sort of thing, are not intending. Obviously there's some creeps. There was one priest that was convicted of sexual crimes, but it's only one over at a lot of the schools. But so none of it made any sense to me. So
no, I think it's very rare for teachers to murder students, but I don't think it's that rare for teachers to abuse students.
Oh, that's a good, Alex, that's a wonderful rejoinder. I agree with you. But what we've done right now, we've already established one thing between the three of us. There is no evidence of murder. There's no evidence of nuns with guns or any evidence whatsoever.
Terrifying thought.
and
guns.
but we do have examples of abuse. And I want you to know, I was fortunate for the last couple of years of high school. I went to a high school that was one of the most famous in Canada among private schools. And I was privileged, I guess, in that way. And I love the school. But I also previously loved, public high schools, and I've only been in a public high school for the last 30 years. So I believe in a very democratic person. But I learned a number of years afterwards that while I was there, that there was a predator among the teachers who was sleeping with some of the students who were in residence at the school. I was a day boy. I wasn't a resident. I didn't stay in residence. And I knew about that because the lawyer for the school contacted all the old boys who were at the school at the time. And I was asked if I had been sexually abused by this one teacher. And I hadn't been, but some boys had, including one person that I knew well. And so I'm not saying that bad things don't happen at schools. I'm not discounting bad things, but I am discounting the testimony of a lot of those people, because a lot of what is being said is just patently untrue. And we can have a discussion as to why people lie. And I think just very quickly to say, the main reason is because they're experiencing trauma. I talked to a friend yesterday who spent years working in Northern Indigenous communities. And he asked me, "Jim, what do you think the percentage of kids who are sexually abused is in those communities, those isolated Arctic communities?" And I said, "I'm going to shock you. I bet it's as high as 40%. And I sensed that he was going to say something like, well, almost nobody, because there's no residential schools. He said to me, almost every kid today is sexually abused. That's today. That's nothing to do with residential schools. That's today. And some of these communities are racked by drugs and alcohol, kids sniffing glue and photocopier fluid and living, on top of each other in these small things. And all it takes is one predator in a small, tight-knit community. And so sexual abuse hasn't gone. The number of Indigenous kids in government care across Canada varies from half of all the kids to most of the kids in government care today. Residential schools have been gone. Most of them were gone by the 1960s. The last one was 1996, but most were gone, almost 70, 80 years ago. So if there was abuse then, yes, I agree with you, Alex, but there's abuse today. And I want to solve that. I don't think any kid should be abused, obviously. So why are we talking about things that didn't happen in the past or didn't happen from nuns and priests? You know what, the sexual abuse that they found out, and there wasn't that much, but where there was sexual abuse, like with Phil Fontaine, the guy who created this whole thing, interview with Barbara Frum in the early 90s, he said that he was sexually abused, and it began the whole, cascade of all this stuff. Guess who abuses kids in schools? Older kids.
Other children.
Older children.
Right.
Yeah. And that's high schools, man. The number of kids, the number of girls that I have taught over the years who have their abuser is not someone outside the school lurking around. It's some boyfriend that she's on a date with. And so, I just think if we want to be honest about any of this, we're not going to solve sexual abuse in any community if we're saying it's all because of schools that closed 70 years ago. And there's, as Leah also said, there's intergenerational. What a load of crap. I'm so you can, if I'm speaking too harshly, or I talked to a friend, Alex.
No, absolutely not.
But I had, and I can swear with the best of them, and I won't do that. But Alex, this is the last thing to say, and I want you to challenge me, man. I want to challenge it. But I talked to a guy who's woke, a teacher who we're friends with. I'm friends with, but he's kind of woke and he sees this issue very differently. And I called him up a couple of days ago, and he started talking about intergenerational trauma. And he said to me that his grandmother lived in a small village in Italy, and she saw members of her family and other members of the village, 93 in total, she was a little girl, lined up against a wall, machine gunned to death by the Nazis. She witnessed 93 people, including family members, being killed in that way. Does he go around, did his father and go around saying, oh, I can't function in today's society because of what happened to my grandmother when she was 7 or 9 or whatever age she was? No, you have to be tough in this world, particularly if you're Ukrainian or Palestinian or Jewish or all sorts of people right now who are experiencing war. This idea of, if my kids ever said to me, oh, I am experiencing international trauma because my parents suck or like that, I would say, look, snowflake.
Then we all have intergenerational trauma if that's the case.
Yeah, right.
But the residential
like rock and
is,
roll.
Right. Yeah, I like the Beatles. But the thing is that people think that the residential school system is ancient history, but I think it's far more recent than a lot of people realize. The last residential school closed in the 1990s, in the late 90s, in fact. So
there's only one. That was one.
You know a lot more about this than I do.
Yeah,
I just know the last one closed in the 90s. But I know that it was still fairly prevalent when Justin Trudeau was prime minister and Jean Chrétien was the Indian affairs minister. So, and that's not that long ago. That's, less than one generation ago. So while I do somewhat disagree with the concept of intergenerational trauma being a significant predictor of your place in life, in some of these cases, these traumas are very new and very real.
Yeah, and first of all, I just love you, man, because you're doing what I want. I want someone smart challenging me, because this goes nowhere. Also, you're a nice guy. And you don't even have to be a nice guy.
Thanks.
But it's nicer what's the point of being angry? I can argue with people. I get along with people. We don't have to. What we're trying to do is trying to create right now. There's no point if we can't come to some sort of ground of consensus. Otherwise, there's no point to this.
Well, we need to test this. And this is the point. We need to test the story. We need to know, like, okay, for example, if this was happening at that time during residential schools, what about other boarding schools in Canada? Was it a similar experience for other Canadians at boarding school, apart from Indigenous people at these types of boarding schools? What it is, I want to be able to compare apples with apples when we're really not comparing that. We're given this one story, but we're not seeing it compared to the stories. You hear, we all listened to The Wall growing up, or and hey teacher, leave those kids. It's all stories of being treated terribly in boarding schools. It's and I have siblings that went through this, nuns cracking knuckles and all of these things. They're horrible stories, and it's traumatizing as a child, but is it any different from what people were experiencing? And that's my curiosity. It goes towards that. Like, we're being told of this story of mass graves, but then it's not included in the reconciliation thing. And then we hear stories about how hard it was for people. But again, if we compare it to other people, yes, that was awful. But was it particularly sadistic is the question.
Okay, can I just take issue with one thing Alex said? And it's a general thing, and I was going to. So he says a generational way. I don't agree with that, because first of all, in a lot of Indigenous communities, they have children at a young age. So in some cases, it's really many generations away from this. That I went to school. I graduated university in 1989, and I'm 65. I have grandchildren in school. And so again, many of the schools were closed in the 50s and 60s. But just piggybacking, if I may, on Kai's point, because I think it's excellent, as is, of course, your points, Alex. And that is, I went to university in this may not interest many people, but in 1978, and my roommate was a 6'2" guy who was with a really low voice, and he had a car, and he had a girlfriend, and he looked like he was 25, and a facial hair and all that kind of stuff. And I was kind of a young looking guy at the time. And one day we were talking about his school. He went to Appleby College in Oakville, Ontario, and it's a private school boarding. He was not a boarding student, but it was a boarding school and a day school. And he did something wrong in his last year of high school, which was grade 13. He was 19. He was bent over a desk, and he had to pull his pants down. And he was hit on the ass with I believe it was the belt. If that isn't perverted and sick and twisted, that was a Tony private school in 1981. I'm sorry, 1978.
Mm-hmm.
Or 77. So this idea that only Indigenous people had a rough time at school, give it up. Dunce caps were part of it. You know, my one last thing, Alex, and I love working with you, because I don't care if people laugh at me, because I'm trying to be funny.
No, I'm not laughing at you.
But the reality is,
in Surrey, we just did that for fun,
nobody
Jim.
can defeat what I'm saying, because it's pure history. My grandmother, and her parents put her in a nunnery to be educated. And my wife's grandmother also, she was an orphan. So my wife's grandmother was raised by nuns in Ireland, and she wasn't given any education because she wasn't considered smart enough. She had too much trauma or something. She just wasn't able to do it. So when I met her and she signed her name, she did it with an X. So I mean, schools were different. But anyhow, my grandmother was left-handed. So she told me one day she was left-handed because I said to her, your writing isn't very neat. And she said, because I'm not naturally a right-handed person. And then she said, but they beat me enough that I learned how to write with my right hand.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
They believe that the devil was represented. You know, in Italian, left hand means sinistra, sinister. So they beat kids for all sorts of things, but they were doing their best. That's what they knew. Right now, the math that's being taught in schools to kids is mostly going to be disproved, because the math that I was taught 30, 40 years ago, or more than that, in school has been largely disapproved. So I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm not saying I'm a bad person, but I'm saying some things that are wrong. But what I know now is, from what learning and going through and under the tutelage of some people who do know about residential schools, did know. And we never talked about them as being bad. It was how were Indigenous kids schooled, because they were schooled separately. They did it this way, and this was successful, and this was less successful. And ultimately, we recognized that we needed not to have them away from their home community, and particularly their family. Although some families were abusive, so you still have kids taken away from families and communities. So like people say, oh, terrible. Like, the reality is nothing is simplistic.
No, it's certainly a world of gray. But I mean, all countries have wars. That doesn't mean that some countries don't experience things worse than other countries. And determining which countries and by how much had things worse is a really difficult thing to do. So I understand that there's that challenge. I guess my concern is, Mr. McMurtry, that if you say that there's no bodies at the Kamloops school, and I actually don't have a strong opinion on that because I haven't studied it very much, but let's say that there are none, my concern is that almost becomes a bit like kook bait for some people out there. We were talking before about the Holocaust comparison. people will say, well, there were swimming pools at Auschwitz, therefore the Holocaust never happened. Right? There's some people out there that are just a little bit twisted, right? And if you give them an inch of uncertainty, they'll take a mile of doubt. And I sometimes am concerned that that might be happening here with this Kamloops story, that people who are very earnest and in good faith trying to get to the truth may be encouraging some people to adopt opinions that really are kind of radically insensitive.
Well, I think you're onto something that's really wise. I just want to say to you, though, anyone who says there's swimming pools at Auschwitz, which I visited and studied, I didn't see or hear anything about a swimming pool at Auschwitz, but it's possible because the commandant, the leader of that thing, the commanding officer, lived very well. Used to play Wagner on his turntable, music player. Like he lived unlike the other people. But the people who were there in that camp, I won't go into it, but it was the most awful thing you could imagine. Particularly the ones that were being walked to gas showers and placed in ovens. So they were not in swimming pools. And they never had. So to me, the experience of people in Auschwitz was incredibly dark. The residential schools, like the one in Kamloops, which did have a swimming pool, but it also had sports teams and grad events. They even had a reunion in 1978. They had cases of teachers adopting kids. Do you know at the school where they're saying all this took place, that the majority of the people working there were Indigenous because the caretakers, the cooks.
I've been there. The building is actually.
And then, but the people were Indigenous. They had 3 teachers in the early 60s when a lot of bad stuff was supposed to be happening. Were Indigenous. Like it's right in the center of the reserve, right in the center of the city of Kamloops. It's this idea that nobody knew, and all of a sudden 215 kids. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not discounting that kids had bad experiences. There was abuse. There was trauma. There were things that shouldn't be visited upon kids. Kids dying of disease at 10. Like, my gosh, that's horrifying. But it was worse. This is coming back to Clyde's intelligent point, comparing apples with apples. A lot of people go, well, the number of kids that died from disease in schools was much worse than at non-Indigenous schools. And you go, well, that's apples and oranges. Because the kids came from the reserves with tuberculosis in particular. It was so bad that they had a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients only a 20-minute drive away from the Kamloops school. What you need to compare is the kids at the school. How many of them died from tuberculosis compared to the kids who are back on the reserve? Because only a third of kids at most ever went to residential school. A third went to day school, and then a third didn't get an education at all. And the kids that stayed in the reserve died at a higher rate from tuberculosis or Spanish flu or other things, in particular tuberculosis, than the ones at the schools. Because the schools, they had weekly visits by nurses, monthly visits by doctors. They had vaccines. They had inoculation programs. They had government inspectors visiting. They had people going in and out of the schools all the time, carpenters, electricians, people were watching, and that's how schools are today. There's all sorts of strangers in the schools that I've worked in, walking in for one reason or another, including parents. It was right in the middle, as I said, of the Kamloops Reserve. Of course, parents came into the school. So this idea that it was a house of horrors, do you think the parents would have put up with that?
Well, that's a great point.
Right,
And then apples to apples with the tuberculosis. We have to recognize that these are rural areas as well. If somebody contracts an infection, some sort of transmissible ailment, they're far away from hospitals. They're far, like whether they're at their residential school or they're at in reservations. That would be quite difficult to transport these people, especially given Canadian winters, things like that. I mean, it's very difficult. It's always been a very difficult thing for our country to bring people to hospitals. So yeah, that's a really interesting point there. I wanted to bring up this story because this is actually what sparked this with Alex and myself. We were talking about this. just after Reconciliation Day. Now, this is an account that both of us follow. She's a lovely person. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea by me sharing this one. Melissa here on X says, today is National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I'm reminded about how strong and resilient my grandmother was. She was 5 when she was forcefully taken from her home. She was 19 when she returned. The tweet goes on to continue. When she returned home, she spent a brief time with her family and took an opportunity to study. She was the first in my family to achieve a degree in social work. She was an advocate for decades to close the residential schools on my reserve. She didn't let her experience define her. It drove her to helping people her entire life. My grandma is one of the thousands of stories you'll hear today and every day. Today, I remember and miss my kukum. Her name is Fredeline, and she made an impact on everyone she met. Now, the conversation continued below this. One account asking this politely as well. I don't want to diminish in any way what happened to or mocking it, but wasn't the purpose for these schools to educate? Apparently, your grandmother achieved the scope. To which she replied, education at what cost? Not seeing or knowing her family or her entire childhood. She saw how addiction ravaged her community and wanted to make a change. She was abused and neglected and carried these scars throughout her life. To which this other account replies, well, I'm sorry about that, but these days, isn't it the same addiction ravaging the same communities? Once again, I'm not trying to diminish what happened back then. And she said, come to me with a solution instead of this. I'm trying not to diminish. And then he went on to say, education would be a good start. From what I see, the anger is coming from these communities, from your communities, he says, not from society towards you. The reconciliation should come from you. You should adapt and live in society as it is now. So this is a back and forth. I found it very interesting. I'm not particularly taking a side either way on this. I just found it very interesting that there is two sides to this whole story. You know, a woman could have had a bad experience in residential schools and be an advocate for getting rid of them for whatever reasons that is. But also a lot of the things that people are saying are attributed to the residential schools seem to be things that are present in the communities still today. So what would be the solution? This is sort of the overarching theme of this conversation. Now, again, I'm not asking a specific question, just more on commenting on this conversation as it goes forward.
Can I say two quick things? First of all, yeah. No kid was forcibly taken. No kid was forcibly taken. I've never heard of a kid. Police officers come to the door, and nuns or priests, and they grab the kid out of the mother's arms. That's just not how it works in Canada.
So how did that become part of the narrative? I'm really
ripped from the mother's arms, and the kids didn't begin at 7. So she's saying that your grandmother at age 5. That's a lie. They didn't take the kids in until at least 7. So anyhow, I know who that is. Anyhow, she's on the other side. I don't want to see myself on any side. If I could, Alex, just give me a quick second and let you come in here. So quite apart from a lot of things that she said were just wrong. And I'd like to say I'm with that guy. And I think most Indigenous people are, because they talk about decolonization, but they don't mean it. Those are white people saying that. Decolonialism is the answer. No, it isn't. No Indigenous person wants to give up his or her cell phone or pickup truck or rifle or going to the grocery store and all these things. That's just complete nonsense. They don't want to give indoor plumbing or indoor heating. No, nonsense. They don't want any of that. They want to fit into our society. It's people who want to keep a fiction alive for money. This is all about, I know there's power and fame and all sorts of other forms of grifting, but this is about money. This isn't about what's best for Indigenous people, nor is it what Indigenous people want. I know so many Indigenous people. Indigenous people are no different than you or me or Alex. Anyway, they want to live well. They want to have a house. They want to have, watch things on TV. They want to play sports. They want to play music. They want their kids to get an education. They want to take trips. People are people are people. This idea that they should live separately is absolute nonsense because they don't want to. It's just complete and utter nonsense. I don't know a single Indigenous person who's ever said, no, I don't want an education. No, I don't want to have a pickup truck. No, I don't want to have a skidoo in the wintertime. No, I don't want to go on an airplane and visit my grandmother in a different city. None of it makes any sense. It's just a game. It's just a game right now for giving people something that they didn't have before. Attention, maybe respect in some quarters, certainly money, maybe more opportunities than they had before, maybe unfair opportunities. Some they don't pay taxes on reserves. Other people pay taxes. They don't pay tuition. I certainly pay tuition. I had 3 kids go through law school. That cost me a lot of money. So I'm not happy with other people not having to pay any taxation or any tuition. So look.
That's why you're so brave. All your kids are lawyers. That's why you keep saying controversial things.
No, that's so funny you're saying that. But my point is this. My point is my father was a lawyer. My brother, my sister, lots of lawyers can look out for me, but they're not all on my side. So let's not go there. They're many of them are woke. I love your kidding. You're a great guy. And I love humor, and I love it when you hit hard, because that makes this a more meaningful conversation. My point is simply this. They're getting things from this. They're getting things because of reconciliation. They're getting between $40 and $50 billion a year, not just the $30 billion between the 2 federal departments. And then there's provincial governments, municipal governments are getting billions and billions, and then they're getting settlements. Conrad Black wrote in the National Post about 6 months ago that his figures, based on the work of a professor at Calgary named Tom Flanagan, is 4.6 trillion. Since Canada became a country, it's been given over to one race within Canada. 4.6 trillion. I'm not here to argue numbers. I'm simply saying that Indigenous people have benefited, particularly recently, from this game of saying, you white colonialists, whatever, particularly British people like me and Vikings like me, you did all these terrible things. So give. And I'm saying, okay, we did some things that were bad for certain. We took land that was yours and so forth. We wiped out the buffalo to a large extent. It was you guys too, but we had our hand in that. But hold on a second. Look at what we did. The first education for you guys started 400 years ago. The first missionaries, which built the country, the Jesuits and the Ursuline nuns and so forth, they were giving schools and hospitals. They were learning your language. They were teaching you hygiene. They were dying for you. This idea, this is just all a joke to me. Residential schools are part of a pattern, historical pattern of trying to be good to Indigenous people, because that's what Canada does. Canada is a decent country that tries to give everybody an education.
Right, but sometimes the path to hell is paved by good intentions. I think that we can all agree that adage is often true. And then I would also say that, yes, the coin of the realm in what Ted Lindsay and Peter Boghossian called grievance studies is trauma, but that doesn't mean that trauma is completely fabricated. In some cases, I believe that this trauma is very real. And just returning to Melissa's point about her grandmother being taken away, I know that you might not believe that story, but I find that story incredibly believable. As we noted very early in the conversation,
there's no evidence, Alex.
Well, hold on. If I may just finish my point, I'll land the plane in just 1 second. So schooling has been compulsory in Ontario since 1871. Even today, if you don't send your kids to school, CPS will come to your door and they will take your kids. So I find that her story very believable.
Yeah.
But not in an extraordinary sort of way, but just in a generic.
Yeah. So Alex, absolutely. The kids after 1920. Now, a lot of people would argue, the research that I work with, that it was rarely enforced, because it's hard to enforce that sort of thing. Because you don't want to upset parents, and you don't want to upset communities, and so you don't want to be a single police officer or a government inspector or whatever, probation officer, going into a school, going into a community and upsetting people. But everything you said is valid, and you continue to say things that are valid. But what I disagree with is that kids weren't ripped from parents' arms. It didn't work with that. They worked. The reason it took 49 more years before education was compulsory for Indigenous communities was because the Indigenous communities weren't sure that they wanted that. They were part of it being compulsory. They wanted an education for their children. So I don't think, and even if parents, even if Indigenous people didn't or don't today, I would still say, I don't give a damn, because I'm a teacher and I care about kids. I care about kids. Kids have a right to know. They have a right to learn. They have a right to make it in this world. So if you say, anybody says, well, a parent says, or a teacher says, or a government politician says, or police officer, anything, I would stand up to all of them and say, well, you can all go yourself. I care about individuals. I'm a teacher. That's my thing. I'm in local parentis. I want what for my students, what I want for my own 3 children. And my gosh, the most important thing of all is I can't provide for them a formal education as well as a school can. So I was smart enough to realize, and most parents are, it's a lot better to hand your kids over to a government to school your kids than to do it by yourself in the house and try and teach, advanced physics or, Spanish.
Yeah. I mean, I think another good historical analogy might be the transatlantic slave trade, right? So people have this weird notion that white colonialists came and put people in nets and took them to the United States and Brazil. And obviously it's not black and white like that. It's very gray, right? So a lot of these people were already slaves. They were owned by African slave owners, and the conditions, let's say, if they made it, to the plantations in the United States were often better than the slavery conditions they would have had in West Africa. But that doesn't mean that the trauma didn't exist. It didn't mean that the experience wasn't terrible, and it didn't mean that it didn't handicap their opportunities and the opportunities of their families for generations to come, right? So just because it's the lesser of several evils doesn't mean that it wasn't an evil experience.
Yeah. And you know what? If I just say about that, Alex, and I want you to see me. I sense in you, and I certainly know it, Clyde, that you're not only a very smart person, but you're naturally empathetic. And I don't think you can be a teacher and not be that way. So I had a kid in my class, and this is giving you an example, not Indigenous. I'm not going to mention, but not white either, whatever, European, but just a kid in my class who one night, father got mad at mother, shot mother. Daughter runs in front of mother to save her mother. She dies. Mother dies. Daughter is quadriplegic. And father gets put in jail for, 25 years. So one day, so I have the kids in my class, and I'm saying to the kid, well, I thought you were playing basketball. How come you didn't, how come you're not going to playing in the team anymore? He didn't answer me. He just left it alone or what. I wasn't trying to. And then he came up to me, found an opportunity when no one was around, and he told me the story. He said, because I'm now the father. I have a younger brother. I can't do anything but work, and I'm going to have to leave school. The trauma that one meets in a big public high school is incredible. If anyone ever suggests to me that I am insensitive to that trauma, then that person has no idea what it's like to be a teacher or anybody that works in a school, because that's what you live. Life is hard for so many. And you know what? I had so little trauma. I'm lucky. I still have trauma. My wife has stage 4 cancer, for example. I still have trauma in my life, but I've been very lucky and blessed compared to most people. So don't think for a second that I don't honor people, but many of them aren't telling the truth. And many of the people that are telling the truth about being sexually abused as children are not, it wasn't the minister or the priest, because people were watching, and that would have been reported, and that person would have been, taken away by the police. It was people in the community that were doing that to others in the community. And that's still happening. If I have people who are experts on what it's like to live in isolated Indigenous communities today and saying to me there's an awful lot of fetal alcohol syndrome, and that does strange things to the brain, and that causes things like incest and stuff. I'm not saying, first of all, it has nothing to do with residential schools. It has to do with people with addiction problems, the people with no employment, with boredom and loneliness and dysfunction in their whole communities and cut off from their past. And like Indigenous people were obviously proud people, incredible what they achieved. And all of a sudden they're supplanted. Everything about them disappears. Their language, I get it. Everything about them. And the people who come in are saying, your ways are inferior. I know how tough that must have been for them. But it was inevitable. It's inevitable that they would move from cooking their food with the intestines of a deer and move to a metal pot. So don't see Europeans as monsters. See Europeans, some were monsters, some were angelic people. All I'm saying is civilizations compete against other civilizations. And right now, according to the most famous historian in the world, Yuval Noah Harari's saying is right now we've got a universal. Everybody's losing everything. Look, I'm an Irish Scot, Celt. I'm a Celt. The first James, my name's James McMurtry, James McMurtry. There was a James McMurtry in the family. He came over here 150 years ago. He lost his dancing. He lost his songs. He lost his language. He lost everything about him as a Celt over time. I have nothing about Celt about me. I'm fully 100% assimilated into Canadian society, British society. That happened to the people in Ireland because of the English. I get that. There's loss. I get there's trauma. I get there's sadness. But that's for everybody. And one day, not only Indigenous languages are going to disappear, but almost all other languages, if not all other languages.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Peterson said if you follow the suffering grievance study logic to its conclusion, eventually you have to fractionate the suffering all the way down to the individual.
Absolutely.
Because God only knows what you're suffering from. Everybody is suffering from something. So I agree with that, but it also doesn't mean that some groups didn't suffer more. And maybe I would even go as far as to say that they suffered so much more that they deserve some form of reparation or compensation.
Well, I think
especially if it's something that they can demonstrate,
But I think that's a really valid point. I don't agree with it. Because I would argue with it, there's other groups that have suffered more than Indigenous people, such as the Jews, because of the Holocaust. So, but even if I agree with you, I would. It doesn't matter. This is an intelligent conversation. Maybe we have to look at groups differently, and we can have. I'm more looking at individuals. As a teacher, you don't look at groups. You look at individuals because parents would have that expectation of teachers. I'm just thinking, Alex, above all others, that if my son just walked in the room, he can't be seen here. And I remember my son when he was younger, but he went through a period of not being a very happy guy. And he'll admit that to you. And a lot of teenage boys and girls go through a hard time. The leading cause of death for teenagers, they say, is car accidents. I think it's suicide, because it's the second leading cause, and a lot of car accidents are caused by kids intentionally doing something dramatically, dangerous or whatever. So why are we in schools talking only about dark things like let's say I agree with you about residential schools were nothing but houses of horror. Even then I would say, what the hell are we talking about that for? They have kids now as young as grades 5 and 6, grade 5 in BC, talking about the Holocaust. People have lost their minds.
Yeah, my daughter's being taught this.
I learned about the Holocaust in grade 5.
But most kids aren't ready for it. Even if 3 kids aren't ready for it in a classroom, they don't need to know in grade 5. They need to be happy.
Most adults aren't ready for it these days.
Yeah, but you see my point about the fact is there's a time to introduce sexuality with kids. It's time to tell them what race they are, if that matters. There's a time to do all sorts of things with kids. say maybe you're a gay kid, but you don't do it at a young age. And particularly you don't feed teenagers who are already dark. Holy crap. Many of them are dark. You don't feed them all this. And you know what the most popular course in many high schools is for social studies? It used to be Canadian history. Now it's genocide studies. Genocide studies, the most popular course in high school history. And people are thinking that's normal. And I'm the guy that loses my job. Holy smokes. And the reason I lost my job is because I'm the type of guy that would say to anyone at any time, anywhere, that you're an absolute idiot, not anyone here, to have a course in British Columbia called Genocide Studies and teach kids only about the darkest times in human history. That's me. That's my view. I'd line them up. Every principal in the world can visit my house tomorrow. I wouldn't care. I'd say the same thing to them, that you have no business running a school, doing that with kids. You wait until they're ready for that. And senior students are ready for that. Not all, but most. But they're getting it again in grade 5. So I would say I'm not here because I disagree with residential schools.
Sure.
Being that I'm here because I disagree with all the indoctrination, all the evil that has captivated schools in recent years, because it wasn't like that when I was a student.
Yeah, I guess just to clarify my point a little bit, I don't actually believe that residential schools were, on the whole, these terror factories where children were tortured, or there were nuns with guns or anything like that. I do, however, believe that some people are still walking amongst us who did suffer terrible trauma at some of these schools, and kids can't really consent to anything. So much in the same respect, if you are taken by the government and you are unlawfully imprisoned and they take years away from your life and you suffer extreme abuse or neglect there, you should be owed compensation by your government. And I think that the same logic applies to a lot of these residential school survivors.
But they were taken to be educated. Like I don't know how you would deny that. Alex, would you deny a kid the right to be educated?
Well, no, but we also wouldn't deny a criminal the right to be properly incarcerated,
I'm not asking about
right? For the good of society,
Alex.
But sometimes good intentions lead to bad results.
Yeah, but Alex, I'm just asking that question. You go back 100 years or 50 years. No, we have to go back 100 years when residential schools are around, right? Because most of them are closed shortly after that.
But
what's the alternative in an area where you can't have a school? If you have a band,
and I think that's maybe where we're talking past each other just a little bit, because your initial argument is that it was residential schools or nothing, and I think that's a bit of a false binary. I think that there was something else in between that might have been better. Now, whether that's true or not, God only knows. I'm not omnipotent.
But that's a good question, Alex. That's a wise statement. My question is, give it to me. The government, with the cooperation, support of churches, and the godly work of those nuns and priests, they created educational institutes for these kids starting 400 years ago in Canada. Yeah, residential schools began in 1883, but the schools were long before that. They're called industrial schools in 1831, and for the Iroquois, and long before that, they were just called mission schools. And whatever, anyhow, what was the alternative? There was no alternative, but no education. There was no other place to learn how to read and to write. That's why I'm saying, look, I can condemn lots of things. But until someone says something is better than what they did 100 years ago.
But I guess if you stay true to the prisoner analogy, if you were to suffer abuse and neglect at a prison that you were taken to against your will, and really against
the schools weren't prisons, so I don't understand.
No, I understand that. No, it's just an analogy, right? I'm not saying that it is a prison, but I'm saying if as an adult you were taken to a prison against your will, and anytime the state takes a child, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of whether they pull it out of the parents' arms or if they take it by some other form of coercion, it's certainly not that child's decision.
Yeah, but let's stick with the facts. The fact is most of those kids were there because the parent filled in an application form.
Sure, but the child still didn't.
And some of the kids
didn't come to an adult decision to go.
No, but that's still the case. That's still the case where all kids have to go to school. But the second thing is some of those.
Sorry, if I can just finish the analogy very quickly. So if you're sent to a prison and you experience abuse or neglect there, and you were taken there against your will, this would almost be analogous to somebody saying, well, that was the only prison we could take you to, so just deal with it. There were no other prisons available. It's not a very, that may be a sufficient explanation for explaining
We're not
reality,
talking about
but
prison.
it isn't a sufficient explanation for the
Sure,
person
sure.
that
But
has
okay,
suffered
let's
terrible
look at it a different way.
trauma.
In 1940 or 1950, they didn't have government protection services for children, like ministries of child protection. They didn't have that. 100 years ago, they didn't have that. They used residential schools for that purpose. They even had adults going to residential schools because there's nowhere else where there's shelter or food for them. So my point is, bad things happen there because the kids had disease and trauma and were abused, and some of them continue to abuse other kids, and all these things happen. All I'm saying to you is, yes, you're right. I wish we could go back 100 years ago and do something better. I'm with you, man. But that was what they had. Johnny McDonald, everywhere his statue is in Canada, is being torn down or broken, or in front of Queen's Park in Toronto, it's in a box.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
It's just unbelievable. McDonald, you know what McDonald did? He spent more Indigenous people than in every other ministry in his government in the 1980s, except for two other things. And in other words, this idea that McDonald and the people at the time didn't care about Indigenous people, that's just so true. It was freely given to them. They wanted these people to do better. I don't believe Canada is, I know religious people want original sin. Canada was not baptized in sin. That doesn't exist. Canada was baptized like the United States was, with good intentions. And yeah, things went wrong, like in residential schools, good things and bad things. But the intentions were good. And why do we stand now in judgment of people 100 years ago when you have no idea how little money they had, what they were dealing with those kids, how hard they had to, many of these nuns had to walk to get to the schools. There was no, to get to Kamloops, there was no train or plane or bus. They walked through wilderness to get to the school.
I suppose, and I'm kind of just playing devil's advocate here. So
I know, but what you're doing, Alex, I'm not feeling that with you. I think you're an amazing guy. But what you're doing is you're allowing me, by what you're doing is you're centering this so beautifully, as did Clyde, on really valuable things. If we go into presentism and say, well, my great-grandfather was a racist or was anti-homosexual or transphobic, I'd say, and you wouldn't be 100 years ago, or like
to today's standards, of course. I'd like to interject here just a bit, and I want to reel it back to a few different sort of ideas that are happening all at the same time. These are all happening at the same time. You have a narrative that all of the founding fathers of the residential schools had ill intent in the reason why they were establishing the residential schools, to take the Indian out of the Indian, is what some people would say, that this was their purpose. Now, that's one narrative. And then there's the other narrative that, it was well-intentioned, but then the schools themselves were the bad actors, and the schools themselves were bad actors across the board. And that was terrible. Then it gets whittled down to, okay, well, there are people who had terrible experiences, and to which I would say, with the argument that you gave earlier, on an individual basis, then, well, on individual basis, if individuals had, they have been trespassed against, well, you can go to the government and you can make an individual claim of this. It wouldn't be a collective claim against a collective in society. It wouldn't be against all white people, for example, or something along those lines. So you can't. So what is it? Like, it seems like the goalposts keep shifting all over the place when it comes to the story of residential schools, in my estimate, because I keep trying to frame the totality of the story, but it keeps jumping around from these different boxes, and it can't be all of them. It has to be one of them. And that's where my confusion comes from.
Why can't it be all of them?
Well, it couldn't be that the founding fathers had ill intent and also were well intended.
Well, I think to some extent, and it's really great that you're here, Mr. McMurtry, you could confirm whether this is true or not. My interpretation of the history has always been that the government outsourced this because they didn't want to have carriage or responsibility over it. So there was really no intention at all. It was just Catholic Church, take this over, so it's not our problem anymore. It was more neglect than any intent at all on the part of the government.
And there would be some neglect, but the government had to work hard to get money from taxpayers to justify these schools. They had inspectors. They themselves were liable to criminal action if things in their schools went wrong. We have a body of law in Canada, and did from the beginning, long before Canada became a country, the British jurisprudence and so forth, that people are responsible for their actions, particularly people in government. So I look at it, but just if I may just shift this a little bit to what Clyde was saying, and I find that really interesting because what I have been called, Alex and Clyde, is a denier, because obviously I didn't say anything wrong in the classroom, because I know my history, and nobody ever got mad at me for saying the same thing for years and years and years. But Kamloops happened, everyone went crazy, moral panic, hysteria, and so forth. So all of a sudden, they're having to go after teachers who everyone said, oh, that's a really good teacher. I won teaching awards, and I was a principal for a time, and blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden, everything changed. So that's what Clyde's saying, is I woke up one day and it was no longer like Toto, we're no longer in Kansas from the Wizard of Oz. I was no longer in British Columbia or Canada. All of a sudden, after Kamloops, I couldn't say all sorts of things that I previously said. So that's how it's been in the school system. You don't dare say anything positive about Christianity, and you don't dare say anything negative about Islam. And then you go, well, I'd rather go with Christianity with Islam. But anyhow, that's just the school system. It's just crazy. So if I'm not a denier of anything, I haven't denied anything. Alex, you asked earlier, deny trauma. Oh my gosh, I love what you said later. Every kid has trauma. I have trauma. I'm probably having some trauma right now because my wife is sitting in the other room going, we want to eat dinner and dad's whatever. and so there's always something. But so they went after me for being a denier, but they can't win in court against me because they have no evidence. But I said, why don't you just be truthful? You're wrong. You don't know your history. You're illiterate historically. I'm not. I'm saying that to my union, my employer, my regulatory body, and my government. I'm saying to everybody that asks, you're wrong, I'm right on this, until you prove me wrong. And since every single professor in the area, anthropologists, historians, and so forth, unless they're completely addled, they say, of course, Jim, you didn't say anything wrong. Every lawyer, judge they talk to, of course, you haven't said anything wrong. So what is it that I've done wrong? Of course, I did nothing wrong, but they're still labeling me. And this woman who we started with, Leah Gazin, wants to criminalize anybody that downplays something that didn't happen. It didn't even happen. There was no discovery. There were no bodies ever there. There's nothing in the apple orchard but a septic thing. And so there were no murder things. There was no missing kids ever. They know the kids that died. They know how they died. They have a list of them. There were 51 in the history of the school that died. So the whole thing is there's just nothing to it. It's just complete hoax. And so yet I've lost so if I come across as, a passionate guy, well, I'll even say this to Clyde, and he can kick me off his show for saying that. I almost felt, Clyde, that was almost too cute. And I love Clyde, and I think he's very smart, smarter than I am. But my point is, I'm much more than a passionate guy. I'm a good teacher. That's really what I am. I'm a good teacher, and I don't go in front of my students if I don't know what I'm talking about, whether it's math or French or history or whatever. And if I said something wrong, I go, oh my gosh, sorry, kids. I got the year wrong or whatever. But if I didn't do anything wrong, I shouldn't have been walked out by 2 vice principals and never be allowed to teach again, and have all these people, all these adults in all these high positions in our province never phoning me, never writing to me, never supporting me, and others wanting to, again, never see me work again, have my family suffer financially, and have me lose my ability to be a qualified teacher, take away my license for life. So I'm fighting them. And I'm telling you, I told people from the very first day, we're going to see who's the last person standing, because truth has a funny way of surfacing.
When it comes to this bill C-413, I don't care if you're stark raving mad and completely wrong. I think that it's dangerous to limit free speech. I think it's devastating. I mean, we could have guys like David Icke who, do presentations that sound great until they get towards the end and it's, the Queen's a lizard person. That's fine. Allow these people a platform. Allow everybody to speak their mind, say what they believe is true. And, that's what the marketplace of ideas is for. The good ideas will win out over the bad ideas. Let's give everything a chance, but everyone a chance to scrutinize everything that's presented and brought forward. And that for me is very, very important. And this is why I like having you on the show. I like Alex with his argumentation and the idea of, devil's advocate in this whole endeavor. I think it would be great if I could get maybe people who are genuinely on the other side, genuinely would want to come in and in good faith have an argument, maybe not a debate. I'm not a moderator in that sense, but argue the points on both sides. I would love to be able to facilitate that if we could have that in a civil way.
But you won't succeed because they won't ever do it.
Well,
I tend to agree. I also don't think that anybody will be. This is why I stepped in, I guess, as the devil's advocate, because
I'm doing my best here.
Yeah. It's important to have some level of discourse about these things, right? Or else we just become peas in our own pod, right, in our own echo chamber. And
what evidence of there if they're a genocide?
No, I don't think.
I'm not talking about Alex. Alex is right. Alex, I know where we're connecting, man. Clicking. I'm just simply saying, if Clyde brought somebody on, what evidence they have behind anything they say? There's no evidence.
The word genocide is broadened to the point of meaningless, which is the most historically disrespectful thing you could ever do, right? I mean,
wow, that makes a lot of sense right there.
People are cheapening that word all the time. Is it a cultural genocide? Maybe. I mean, but cultural genocide is a bit of an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp. You can't murder a culture, right? You can. So I don't know.
But you can't forcibly assimilate people, and we certainly have done that to all sorts of groups into the Canadian norm.
Yeah, you can destroy a culture. You can absolutely. I mean, languages do disappear, much like people die. So,
but just if I may say this, and I in different circumstances, Alex, I think you're also smarter than I am. That have you do more talking than I. But I'm the guy that knows more about this particular subject.
Oh, certainly.
And so if I'm talking a little bit more than you or Clyde, then I think that's the whole purpose of it a little bit. And
this is why I have you guys on. It's not all about me. It's about facilitating these conversations.
I'm certifiably unqualified to be talking about this.
But on that note, and just with Clyde saying, and he keeps bringing up, you guys both bringing up some just great points. Look, I had a professor at a university in Canada named Sean Carlton do a tweet today where he mocked me and referred to me as a racist and called my tweet that got 1.3 million views, as I said, the most disgusting example of denialism that he's come across recently. So that's defamation of character. That's defamation. Anyhow, I don't care because
tweet, by the way, I'm showing it on the screen.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent thing. But I don't have a problem with that because I just think but I would go, come on, Sean Carlton, you get money from being the lead spokesman for the side, you're with Leah Gaz and you're the people that are all saying people like me are monsters and, we commit genocide or our ancestors do. Just talk to me, just debate me. And, but they never will. No one, my employers never talked to me. No one in my school district, including teachers, no one will ever go near me on this because they don't know what they're talking about.
Well, as soon as I find someone that would be willing, I will.
Sure, but they're not going to have any evidence. So if they can find someone, then it will be someone who's self-confident and whatever, and will say, "Oh, you're whatever," but they won't make any sense until they dig in Kamloops, until they dig somewhere else and find evidence of a child that was harmed by a teacher, by a priest or a nun. That's what was in, that was, God, you just said a few minutes ago how things keep changing, the reference point keeps changing. That was such a wise point. So that's it. They originally said mass grave murder of 215 kids. That's what they're saying in my school. That's why I got in trouble. I didn't say murder. The allegation against me is I didn't say murder. And now they're saying, oh, no, McMurtry's denying that there were residential schools. That's what a denier is, that you're denying there were residential schools, or you're denying there are bad things.
I don't think anybody's denying that. Nobody's denying that.
No, every school, there's bad things happening, particularly I would think residential schools, because there was a cultural assimilation, because there was kids away from home and all sorts of things, and religious people who want to impose their ideology. Look, yeah. But
we're going through that right now with wokeism being an imposition on people, and I mean, how far have we come? We're still doing it. We're still doing it.
But if I could just, and that's an incredible point. But my thing is this: is where we were 3.5 years ago was McMurtry was let out physically out of class in front of his students because I was considered to be a physical or emotional harm. Why else would they leave me out right in front of my students? And I'm right. Lost. I haven't been any pay, any job for them. Why would they do that to me unless I did something really bad? And all I said was something that was in the Truth Reconciliation Report. And so now they know that McMurtry was 100% right, and they were 100% wrong about murder, about the fact that McMurtry only talked about it was in the Truth and Reconciliation. But so what they do is they change the point of reference, as you said, Clyde. They just pretend it's about something different. That's it. That's just a tactic. Oh, you're a denier. What am I denying? Truth to me is only as long as it's not truthful. If they dig tomorrow and find 215 little kids, then I'm going to think, oh, I guess I know now why I was fired.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry to laugh at that. Wow, that caught me off guard.
No, you'll really be eating crow at that point.
Yeah.
That's what you do. No, I don't care about that. I get things wrong all the time. Try raising kids. You get things wrong all the time. Try it then. Now with 150 students through a day, you get things wrong all the time. So we have to be humble.
Yeah,
but I love somebody, but I'll never in my lifetime meet anyone anywhere. I've had people all day, particularly in the last week, saying, I'm going to meet you on the street, come to your door. I'm going to take hammers. Me and my friends are going to take hammers to you. I've got all this stuff that's happened. It's online. And all I'm saying is it's never going to happen, because anyone that comes up to me is going to lose an argument. Because they don't have any facts. Now, if facts appear, then they'll win the argument. But of course, it's not going to happen. There's no priest investigation. The archaeologist, one person said, "Oh, there could be graves," and no one can read a report. It's locked by the band. No one's allowed to go near it. You can't fly drones over. You can't go anywhere near that reserve. They closed the museum. They've done everything to make sure nobody will ever dig. And yet, it changed Canada. It changed Canada.
Yeah, there's nothing suspicious about that.
But it's changed Canada. You know, so the lawsuits that have come in since Kamloops discovery, the welfare thing, which was 40 billion plus, like all these things, they're just giving, it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And now, as I said a little bit earlier, you got premiers like Evie in BC who wants to give Crown land ownership over to people of a different race. And like, I'm going, okay, we're going to revisit apartheid in South Africa. And how well is that going to go?
Wow.
What was going to happen when you subjugate 95% of the population? It's going to be like South Africa. They're going to rise. So I just think
some of Pierre Trudeau's reforms of the Indian Act based off of South African apartheid? Wasn't that a model that he used?
I think the white paper in 1969 was the idea that this is important to me as well, and I've said it many times. You can't treat people differently and expect that they're going to be happy. You go into a classroom, some kid says, "Well, that's all the time. That's not fair. You let him do this, and I can't have my phone or whatever." So we realized long ago, with the Magna Carta and all sorts of things in 1215, we realized long ago it's good to have basic rights for everybody, right? And such as equality and justice and so forth, habeas corpus, all these things. And now what we're doing is we're saying, no, we need to go back in time and take away, the word BIPOC. Someone said the other day to me, I was being interviewed yesterday, and said, BIPOC means, by adding the POC, people of color, but BIPOC is, we're just helping the BIPOC kids in schools. We're just helping them in society. We're just giving them the scholarships and the better jobs and all that kind of stuff, getting into professional school. But then you stop and you go, well, BIPOC means everybody but white people. And you go, whoa, that's a really great idea. Because what you're doing, some of my classes, there's one white kid. So the white kid who's by himself in my class has realized long ago, POC, that means I'm alone. That means everyone's being favored but me. How is that fair? And yet you get all these just moronic politicians from the beginning of time in Canada, judges everybody, including people, my friend group and my family, all over the place, thinking, oh no, we need to do this. We need to give special rights to these people so they can just treat you like garbage. And in my case, they can say, if I say things that are historically accurate, I can be out of a job.
Wow. So it's always an intense conversation when we discuss these topics. I definitely want to thank you both for coming on and going through this. I'm gonna obviously you guys are welcome back anytime. I'm gonna go through some of these super chats before we end it off. There might be some points in here. Gary Krell with a $10 super chat says, "Howdy, Clyde and fellow Clydesters. Do we know who is projected to win the provincial in BC? Also, if it isn't AIDS, it's just blood clots and heart problems." Okay. That's part of that. I think we don't know what the projected winner will be. It's very neck and neck with the NDP and the Conservatives at the moment. I hope people will get up and vote for something different than what we've had for some time. I think we could use a little change around here. But that's up to you and getting out there and registering and voting. So hopefully everybody gets out and does that. October 19th, get out there. Make sure you're registered ahead of time. Please do that. Mr. Roscoe Pico for $5 says, "I have friends who were at residential schools who might be a good addition. I could see if one would jump in for you, Clyde." Well, that would be great if you if you could make some contacts, make any of that available to me. I would be more than welcome to have other perspectives on this. That's the idea of having open dialogue with people. So thank you so very much. Charlie with the $6.99 super chat. "My wife's father would never talk about what happened at his school." Not sure if that's residential or otherwise. A lot of people won't talk about what they happened at Catholic boarding school, and that's across the board. And I'm still going to hold firm on that. I would like to know if there's a discrepancy between those two. Mr. Live Line Solutions, all one word. I'm dyslexic, and you made that very difficult for me. Thank you very much for the $10 super chat. "Caucasian construction companies all have Indigenous sister." I see you laughing there. Anyway, Caucasian construction companies all have Indigenous sister companies to qualify for government contracts because they wouldn't have a chance without some Indigenous UNDRIP points. Endgame is UNDRIP. And I've heard of this. People gaming the system, having token representatives in their businesses in order to do this. This is the nature of the beast. This is the way economies work. If something's required, people will go out of their way to get that one thing, even if it's a person. and that's the way the world works. The only color people care about when it comes to business is the color green. In Canada, it's all funny, fancy colors, but yeah, I mean money. That's what people care about. Janice Pollard with a $5 super chat says, "I'm a boomer. My grade 1 teacher dragged me up to the blackboard by my ear across the desk aisle. I was 6 years old." Yes, I've heard so many stories like this. It's terrifying. It's terrifying, and there's a reason why we don't allow this kind of physical abuse in schools anymore. This used to be the norm, and it's a good thing people have come forward with these types of stories to put an end to this kind of behavior. Dawid Lazowski, I always have a hard time pronouncing that one. $5 says Aaron Pete might do it. He had Candace Malcolm to debate this. He is reasonable. Okay, Aaron Pete, that is somebody to look up on this. Jim, do you know who he is?
No.
Okay, so
can I just quickly say there, the Princess Diana's brother went to one of the fanciest private schools, boarding schools in England, and he was raped.
Right. Okay. So even royalty, this could happen to. So, oh wow. So nobody's safe from this kind of thing. Angela Cordoso with a $2 super chat says, "Great chat, gentlemen. Thanks, gents. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank everybody who came out for this chat tonight. Thank you both so very much. I want to make sure everybody can find where you guys are online. Of course, Jim McMurtry, you're on Twitter. Where else can people find you, Jim?
Ideally Twitter by direct message, because I'm good at answering direct message.
Okay, perfect. So it's Jim at Jim McMurtry 1, number 1. Says you're the only one.
01.
01. Okay, you can follow Jim McMurtry there. Also, give Alex Zoltan a follow. Great having you in the chat tonight, Alex. As always, check out Alex. We've been doing live spaces on X lately. I go for walks in the evening. This is a thing I like to do in my spare time after work. Getting a little bit extra calories burnt at the end of the day. It's a healthy thing to do. So the great thing to do is just pop something in my ear, and I have a chat with Alex, and other people can join if you're interested in joining these conversations. Yourself as well, Jim. You're always welcome.
I'd love to have you.
Yeah, I would love to have you continue these conversations. Jump in there. Follow all of us on Twitter. Follow all of us on YouTube and all the spaces. And of course, I want to thank you again for everybody for joining this evening. We'll be back Monday morning for the regularly scheduled broadcast. So we'll see you all then. Everybody, keep on trucking.
Thanks again.